to NC Spin.
We continue our discussion of the Connect NC bonds. The General Assembly passed authorization for these bonds in September and scheduled the vote for March 15th. Joining us on this panel will be House Speaker Tim Moore and Senate Minority Leader Dan Blues. Speaker Moore, I want to start with you. $2 billion is a lot of money for the state to borrow. Explain to us how you came up with the right amount for this package.
Well, actually, the House proposal was more than $2 billion, and it was pared back to this as a result of compromise. We came up with these figures really based on the critical needs that the previous speakers have talked about, whether it's the universities, water and sewer grants, agriculture, National Guard. All of these things have been critical needs, and we haven't done a bond package since the 90s, so we felt like we really needed to step up and fund it in a meaningful way.
Dan, Governor McCrory had originally asked for an additional $1.5 billion for transportation. Help us understand why the legislature decided not to include transportation at this time.
The general feel was that in the ongoing continuing budget, because of adjustments in taxes, tax increases, that there would be about $500 million annually for highway transportation on an ongoing basis, so it didn't make sense.
And there was some understanding this isn't going to get us to the $25 billion that we need in transportation, but at least it'll get us started.
It's a start comparable to what happened with
So do we expect there might be a transportation bond? I don't want to put you on the spot, but might we expect a transportation bond referendum coming up in the next few years?
I don't see the need for one, because we made changes to the way money was being transferred out of the Highway Trust Fund, and the way we've kept money from being transferred. You're going to have roughly $400 million more each year going to transportation. The original bond package would have only had $500 million one time. We're actually going to be putting in $400 million each budget cycle here on.
So you feel like that the need will not be there for a transportation bond?
At this point, we do.
All right. So tell us about the timing for the vote. My memory serves me that typically bond referendums, statewide bond referendums, are held in November. Why March 15th?
The thought was that we wanted to go ahead and get it out there and make sure that folks could really dedicate the information and the time to understanding the bonds. The general elections tend to be more competitive, more divisive, and bond issues tend to get pushed to the back of the burner. We're hoping that this time it may get more attention.
But Dan, this didn't give the committee very long to be able to get this thing up and running and organized and raise the money to message.
Not long at all. But part of the reasoning, too, was that bonds are as cheap as they've been historically. And the sooner you got it on, 6 or 8 months could make a big difference in the bond rate. So you could pay them off much more cheaply.
All right, here's the big question. You're telling the voters this isn't going to cause a tax increase. Over and over again, I've heard people say, yeah, that's what politicians always say. How can you help assure people that it will not cause a tax increase? Dan, I'll start with you.
Well, based on the projections, it won't, but I will tell you, Tom, even if it did, it would be well worth it, because we have to invest in the future, in the infrastructure. If we expect to attract the brightest to North Carolina and retain the brightest in North Carolina, especially through the university.
And because of various economic cycles, we haven't been able to put a bond, as you said, Speaker Moore, we hadn't put a bond issue on the ballot in a long, long time. What do you say to folks that say they don't believe that we're going to not have a tax increase?
We've run the projections. These bonds will not result in any tax increases. In fact, if you look 3 to 4 years out from now, even with these bonds, North Carolina will owe less than it owes today.
All right. John or Chris?
Well, if I may be a little bit Johnny One note, let me push back a little bit on the no new taxes thing, because I think lots of people do have skepticism, as Tom said, about it. And one of the scenarios they imagine is, what if, and no one wants this to happen, but what if in the next year or two there's a recession and you have revenues come in way below projections and you have expenses for Medicaid and other things come in above projections? The bonds have to be, that's debt service, that's going to be paid first. They wonder in that scenario if there wouldn't either have to be budget cuts or tax increases to accommodate these bonds. What do you think? How would you avoid at least having a tax increase occur during a recession?
We don't see the need for a tax increase. In fact, if you look at the General Assembly in the last few years, we've actually cut tax cuts through this year's budget, and what we're seeing is that lower taxes are spurring greater economic activity and more revenue.
Gentlemen, there's some people that are just worried about adding more debt to the state. We've traditionally been considered a relatively low debt state. How are these bonds going to affect our state debt?
It won't affect the rankings or the credit ratings at all. But what it will do, again, Tom, the important thing is that it will start addressing pent-up needs that haven't been met in more than a decade. And typically when you're coming out of a recession, as we were in, you start doing the things that you've fallen behind on. And I think that this gives us an opportunity to do a little. But the overall debt for the state is not overwhelming. The treasurer has said that it does not put an extra burden on the state.
But as the speaker said, it's been how many years since we had a state bond referendum? It's been a long time.
15 years.
The $3 billion university bonds, I guess, were the last times we asked the voters to go for a debt.
I've actually heard a couple of people, and I think we alluded to this in earlier segments, wondering why the state can't pay for some of these as we go. And we mentioned the local water and sewer grants. There was a problem, the Clean Water Management Trust Fund that used to, I think, be funded at $100 million a year that did help a lot of local governments with their water and sewer needs. Why is the bond borrowing money or setting up a revolving fund a better idea than going back to the way we used to fund it with the Clean Water Management Trust Fund?
Frankly, I think a combination of the two models is a way to do it, Chris. In this year's budget, we also had funding for water and sewer grants as well. But this is a major way to really kick it into high gear and really get some serious money out there for critical infrastructure needs.
Why should we pass these bonds? We're going to ask the Speaker and the Senator after these messages.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the